How's it going, everyone? Got another guest with us today. Our guest is Anon. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. How's your night going?
It's going pretty well so far. I can't complain. So, how long have you been practicing for?
Honestly, I'm a little bit of a newcomer when it comes to the scene. I've only been more serious with my practice, I want to say, going on around 3 years now.
Okay. And what got you interested in the first place?
I've been interested kind of more or less my whole life. Kind of little thing about me, I was raised in a Catholic household and all that stuff, and I wouldn't say that they necessarily discouraged me from doing anything or anything along those lines. But when you're a kid, you sometimes think like you watch it on TV and you think, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool! What if you
Mm.
could actually do things like that?" And kind of aging myself right now, I was born in the early '90s, so I think this is when it was starting to get more acceptable. You start to see like crystal books and all that stuff in the
Uh-huh.
bookshelf. So I think my younger sister and I think we asked our mom, "Hey, can we have one of those?" And we would play around with things like that. And funnily enough, I think I may actually still have them lying around somewhere. But
Hmm.
mm,
That's
I want to say around
awesome.
3 years ago. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's awesome. That's about when I was born as well. Early '90s. I was actually I'll date myself. I was born in '91. So yeah,
You
it's
got a
funny
year on
how
me.
okay. I'm winning the race. No, no. Well, it depends how you look at it. That might mean that I leave the race more quickly.
Well,
so
you got a year of wisdom on me, so I mean, there's that, and you've
uh,
had more magical experience than me too. So hey, I look up to my mentors.
hmm. Yeah. Well, some people do more with a year than others. Maybe you know what I mean. It's hard to say what we get out of the time that we have on this earth.
Touche,
I
fair point.
Yeah, I was raised Catholic as well, and the whole ceremony of it was just captivating as a child. I mean, I can still smell the frankincense, and I can still hear, the sing-songy talk that they would do, and how trance-inducing the whole process is.
This is kind of spoiling a little bit a question further
That's okay.
along the road, I'm sure. But yeah, it's funny that you actually talk about that right now. Even though I personally myself identify more with the left hand path current with my current practices and my current workings
Mhm.
to kind of reconcile a vision that I actually had while meditating one time. And yeah, vivid vision. I, funnily enough, saw two figures side by side with each other that I would not think that I would see with each other. And I'm just like, okay, what does that mean? So
Mhm.
my current interpretation is, okay, I got to reconcile what I saw. So kind of a long-winded explanation of I'm actually attending different denominations of Christianities right now, just kind of seeing how they accept what they call the Christ and how they actually go into it because I'm also a polytheist too. So seeing these Catholic masses and things like that now, I'm just kind of scratching my head and saying, um, you guys are polytheists, aren't you? And I say
Yeah.
that kind of like with a little snicker myself, but I'm like, I don't know. When you're in it, it makes sense. But now that I'm staying on the outside of it, I'm just like, this seems so much like polytheism. I understand that the gods have different personalities and different aspects, but I'm just like, even then, there's still that aspect of separateness to them. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I always thought that it was interesting how like the saints in the Catholic tradition were essentially like demigods. And I always thought it was interesting. Most Catholics I know pray to Mary. And I always thought that was really interesting. It's not that they can't pray to God or Jesus, but every single Catholic that I know prays to Mary. And that is just very non solar and very non um, modern as far as like Catholicism and Christianity go, from my perspective.
Right. If anything, you would equate that more with the divine feminine. So that'd probably be more like lunar or Venetian currents, depending
Yeah.
on like which aspect of her.
Yeah, which is like a callback to the Isis current or like the Hathor current almost, or Hathor.
Path or Hathor. I'm sure the ancient Comedics probably pronounced her name a myriad of different ways.
Probably so. So you mentioned that you identify more with the sort of left hand practices. Like, what does that mean specifically for you?
Um, Obviously, well, not to say obviously, I would probably align myself more closely with the Western interpretation of it. So,
Mhm.
even though I do incorporate meditation and things like that, practice that the Western left hand path is just kind of embracing that. Stephen Flowers, he calls it antinomian, but
Sure.
just kind of trying to go against the current, trying to see how you fit into the system and everything like that. And,
Okay.
just seeing, not inherently trying to go with it, but, you know, not picking and choosing. I'm trying to think of a proper way of saying it. Just like having the freedom to figure it out for yourself, not feeling limited to any one sense of dogma or anything like that, having that freedom and that liberty to express yourself through these different currents and finding your own light and letting that radiate out.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that resonates very deeply with me. And Stephen Flowers is an author that I deeply respect. Lords of the Left Hand Path is a really good primer. If anyone out there who's watching this is wondering like what all of this might be about for some of us, you mentioned antinomian. I mean, that's almost a perfect, in my mind, a perfect way to describe this. It's like I attribute it to like taking everything as a template as opposed to like truth.
So kind of allowing chaos magic, or maybe not even necessarily chaos magic. There's actually another channel called Scroll of Thoth, and he actually used the term emergent magic. So even though he himself came from a more chaos magic standpoint, his new take, and if he ever hears this, I apologize. Hopefully, I'm not putting words in your mouth. Um, he valued, based on what I got from his videos, the concept of the tribe and being able to build traditions off of that.
Mhm.
So when I first heard that, I felt like that kind of sounds like the tradition that you would have maybe in a gnome in Egypt or something like that, like a local tradition or something like that, like how every gnome and every town had their own patron gods and everything like that, their own
Mm.
cosmology and everything like that.
Okay. Yeah, I've actually never heard of that channel, so I appreciate you bringing that up. That's another source for me to look into. What are some of your favorite types of workings to do? Or what are some of your favorite parts of practice, you might say?
Admittedly, I feel like I kind of jumping questions. One of my weaknesses
Okay.
is I'm not as structured as I feel as I could be. So I have a couple of rituals that I do for the intention of trying to be more or less balanced. So I do the LBRP daily, so like the regular right hand path version of it.
Hmm.
Sometimes I do the left hand path version of it, or what do they call it in Triak Leaf, the ritual of the Dark Tower, I believe.
Hmm.
I think you've actually shown that you have that book as well. So I use that ritual as well sometimes, but I specifically use that at nighttime sometimes. And another one that I definitely do daily is one of the entities that I work with is Asmodeus, or as I call him, Ashima Deva.
Hmm.
So I
Interesting.
will, yeah, so I'll do the LBRP first. I'll say thank you to Set for allowing the new day to happen, because kind of a right hand, left hand combo that I kind of spin together is in even right hand text in right hand versions of Cometicism. The reason why the sun rises is because Set is the one who slew Apep and allowed Ra to essentially rise again the next morning.
Hmm.
So I say thank you to Set for the previous night. Thank you for allowing the new day. I say thank you to Horus, your brother, for the light of the new day in which you bring.
Hmm.
I say, kind of combining pantheons, I say thank you to Eshu Elegua, Papa Legba. I
Hmm.
say thank you for opening the way and clearing the path before me. and helping me to commune with the gods. May you continue to bless me and balance me, O Lord of the left and right hand paths. So I'll go through those three. I'll say thank you to them. And then I will say thank you to Asmodeus. He's actually one of the first entities that I actually got to commune with through another ritual I did. So I make sure to pay daily respect to him as well.
Okay. Interesting. I love hopefully it's not offensive, the mishmash of systems. I am all for that. I that resonates very deeply with me. Like I said, I will use things as a template, and if it resonates with me and it works with me, then I'll use it. If it doesn't, then I'll leave it for other people. I don't consider it wrong. I just consider it not for me. And I've never thought about, I say Ishma, but Ashima, and Asmodee, Ashima Deva, and Asmodeus. That's an interesting correlation that I hadn't considered before. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and you brought up Lords of the Left Hand Path. I'm actually thumbing my way through it as well. I'm actually kind of a little early along in it still. Well, not super early along in it. I forget exactly where I am in it, but he actually made the correlation between Ashima Deva and Odin or Woden. So that kind of force,
Yeah, okay, okay.
how they kind of split off between the Proto-Indo-European peoples, how like the more Vedic peoples kind of associated more with the Ashima Deva aspect, whereas more the what would later on become the Nordic peoples would identify that force, that god, with Odin or Woden.
Certainly, yeah. That's sort of a Promethean Luciferian character, if you think about it from a certain perspective too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of your least favorite workings? Either they conflict with your perspective or your ethics, or you don't enjoy doing them.
I don't really have any moral limitations per se. I don't think that I would personally do things like love spells or anything like that, even though I work with a god like Asmodeus. Not to say that he
Sure.
couldn't help me with that, I'm sure, but I'm admittedly kind of awkward in that regard. So I feel like maybe one of the reasons why he did reach out to me when I performed my ritual was he saw that deficiency within me. He's like, hey, let me help you out. But like I've done a curse before, so I'm not opposed to painful workings or anything like that. And in all fairness, he deserved it. So whether or not I did that working, I'm sure he would have reached a similar result. So if anything, I just helped nudge
Fuel
that
for the
domino in
fire.
that direction.
Right.
But one working that was interesting for me that kind of put a roadblock up for me, I think, was actually me trying to descend down the tree of Qliphoth, believe it or not.
Okay.
So I actually tried to interact with the first Qliphoth, and I kind of did a modified ritual of tree of Qliphoth, how they had it. I read the ritual out. I did my own little flavor to it, and I believe I either got in contact with Lilith or one of her servants,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just kind of really surprised by the answer that I got.
Huh.
Like you all assume that I shouldn't say you all, but whenever you think about entities like Lilith, you don't necessarily think of them as more merciful or things like that. And kind of one of the things that happened when I did the ritual was she said, hey, you need to allow forgiveness into your heart without going into too much details about the context.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm just like, I'm sorry, did I dial the right number? I was very surprised to hear that from Lilith of all entities. And I can't remember if I got that answer the same night that I saw someone or if that was a couple of nights before.
Mm-hmm.
But I do recall while meditating, I had another vivid vision. And again, I'm not sure whether or not I saw Lilith herself or if I saw
Like
one of her
Nahima or someone.
servants.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she was very she did not present herself in a beautiful fashion. If anything, she looked like a combination between the woman that you would see from The Grudge or The Ring, and kind of like,
Yeah.
um I'm not trying to make fun of her, but like Gollum-ish. Just her proportions were
Sure.
very gangly. Her hair was very long and matted, and I just said, with respect, I do not feel I'm ready to work with you right now if this is what you're asking of me. So
Right.
that regard of the divine feminine, I feel like I respectfully turned away from, but we'll just have to see. I do want to try working with Lil again to see whether or not there is, maybe I misunderstood her. Like maybe forgiveness didn't inherently mean forgiving the people. Maybe it just meant allowing myself to let go. So
Mm.
I'll have to try it again. Never give up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I've found many different aspects. It depending on how I go into the working or where my emotional or psychic mental state is, has a very large influence on the way that these entities or these principalities for some will manifest. And I find often the way they manifest is a direct representation of a message that they're trying to give you, and that's
Right.
always been fascinating to me. I have definitely witnessed that grudgy golem-esque aspect of of the feminine, and it was almost, to me, it felt like acceptance. Like they say, like, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best sometimes. And I felt like that's sort of what it was. Like I had to like accept the beauty in that form, and then ever since then, like it was like her skin peeled like a flower, and like this like beautiful, like certainly still dark but more goddess energy emerged, and it was just like wow. So maybe there's something to that for anyone who's listening, or maybe for you, I'm not sure. I find it very subjective oftentimes, but I forgiveness for me definitely means more about letting go, I think, than accepting the decisions, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I feel like yeah, and that's honestly a deficiency I feel within myself. I'm very self critical. And
Yeah.
as a part of that, I feel like, hey, I know what I should be working on, things like that. And I like to get other people's opinion as well, kind of like
Mhm.
I did with you.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
try to
So go ahead.
let the message sink in. So, see.
Mhm. Yeah. Self forgiveness is huge for a lot of people on this path. A lot of the ways that we come into this, or a lot of the actions that we perform ceremonially, are because of traumas that we've experienced, or because of um, an inability to accept our potential a lot of times. So that's one of my daily rituals, is about like being reborn when I wake up and leaving all of that old shit behind, and just coming into, the next version of myself that's a stepping stone along the way to my potential. And forgiveness, self-forgiveness especially, has been a very, very large part of working in the cliff off for me. um One, accepting that it's a part of me, and forgiving the perspectives and actions that caused me to like repress a lot of that stuff. So it doesn't surprise me that forgiveness was brought up, and I love that you're willing to um retranslate things based on the perspective. I think that's very important.
Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, you kind of have to. I mean, not to say that you have to.
It's
It,
beneficial.
I feel it's more beneficial to,
Hmm.
yeah, definitely much more beneficial. Accept the wisdom of others. Don't repeat the same mistakes.
Hmm.
Um, that others have been. Look,
Are you still there?
can you hear me?
I can now. Yeah, you were breaking up a
Hold
little
up.
bit there for a second.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the internet in my place is on, so I apologize about that.
That's okay. I'm wondering if the slideshow might be cutting into some of the connection, but as long as we don't have issues, we can keep it rolling.
Okay, yeah, if it's an issue, let me know. I think I can switch it to just like a regular still image or something like that. So yeah, if
Okay.
it's a hiccup again, let me know.
We'll just keep moving on, and if we have issues, then we'll adjust along the way because we're magicians and that's what we do. So,
We
how
ride the
has
chaos.
exactly how has magic changed your life for the better, or how has your practice changed your life for the better?
How has it improved my life for the better? I feel like, again, being raised Catholic and everything like that, I felt like after I stepped away from that, I had no sense of religion or no sense of the gods anymore. I
Yeah.
actually identified as an atheist for a little bit, but for whatever reason, for me personally, that just didn't really sit well with me. And then I thought, well, what if I actually look into this again? One of the first actual magical books that I bought was actually the Satanic Rituals. Funnily enough, I bought that before the Satanic Bible. So,
Interesting.
my friend,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, that's what my all my friends say too. They're like, "Why would you get the ritual before the context?" I'm like, "Because I knew what I wanted out of it, so I didn't need to know his manifesto." So I
Exactly.
wanted,
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to try his methods. I didn't want his manifesto, but eventually I got both. Shoot, where was I going with that? Yeah, just basically, I felt like there is more to it, and even the Levian translation of whether or not you believe it, if you even if you think it's just a psychodrama or whatever, it still has an impact.
Oh, sure.
So I feel like for me, doing rituals daily and things like that is a sense of discipline.
Hmm.
And as I continue to go along this path, I realize I don't need to be right hand path to believe in the gods or worship the gods. And moreover, my role is beside them.
Well said. Yeah.
Slave. I'm meant to become their equal.
Hmm.
And to me, that's kind of what the concept of what an Ak was in Egyptian system. Like they would actually pray to them like the saints that we do today. So if that's just more reason why I kind of feel like
Yeah.
Catholicism or just extensions of that Egyptian.
It seems like you're breaking up a little bit more. I wasn't sure if you were done talking or not. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting.
Oh no, I just finished talking. Am I
Okay.
still coming in?
Yeah, you are. You are. So, what are some of the ways that you get in? Uh-oh. All right. So, we are back. We had some technical difficulties. I apologize. We will get right back into it. So, you were talking about how your practice has changed your life and it for the better, and it seems like you were attributing like a greater sense of meaning and a greater sense of connection to the world around you, perhaps, or maybe I'm just butchering what you said.
I wouldn't necessarily say to the world around me per se.
Mhm.
If anything, I feel like I can definitely see more beauty in it and looking into all these cultures. Yeah, definitely that way. But uh, I don't know. Maybe it's just like a combination of all these things. Hopefully, I'm getting a little bit wiser with age, and that's allowing the transition to happen as well. But
Mhm.
if anything, I'm trying to kind of go back against what is being pushed right now in
Yeah.
certain regards. Like, I definitely do not agree with the concept of monotheism and the Almighty One is the supreme and all that jazz. So, if anything, I'm very much against when it comes to things like that. But again, the lenses that I'm seeing it through now, I'm just kind of like, okay, I can still see, I can still see you there. Like I can see your roots and everything like that. I'm just like, I still see you there.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
kind of how I'm viewing it.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Um, and we could get more into that, but yeah, I guess the next question I was going to ask was, how do you get in the mindset for your workings? Is there like, do you listen to a certain kind of music? Do you play an instrument? Do you light incense? Anything that you could share with us in regard to that?
For my more heavy rituals or more intense rituals, I'll do things like incense, sometimes I'll just kind of like meditate for a few minutes to just kind of clear my mind and everything like that, allow myself to, as you say, get into the mental space of the
Mhm.
ritual and everything like that. So yeah, just clearing my mind, light some incense. Um, yeah, just some kind of standardized stuff that I feel like a lot of magicians will incorporate in their practices the more they'll learn.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's I mean, things are common for a reason, especially among artists. If there's no reason to try to reinvent the wheel, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And who are some of your um like influences, I guess? You mentioned Stephen Flowers and you mentioned Anton LaVey. I don't know if you would consider them influences, but do you feel like there are any people from the past that you feel were sort of like steps up to your practice?
Um, I definitely would allow them to be considered influences into my practice.
Mhm.
Basically, I allow anyone that I feel has something good to say into my practice if I feel like they've got something worth sharing. Like in my personal life, I'm actually really privileged. You've already got to interview Kefira.
Mhm.
Like I actually get to have firsthand correspondences with him,
Mhm.
and personally, I feel like I was really privileged to actually get to meet him and all the
Same.
associates that I have met through him.
Yeah,
So he's
absolutely.
definitely opened up my mind to Settianism in ways that I didn't even think to look into beforehand. Like I don't need to be a member of the Temple of Set to still call myself a Settian. I don't have
Mhm.
to go full on Orthodox Kemet system or anything like that to still
Sure.
worship Set or anything like that because
Mhm.
that would kind of paint him in a bad light.
Mhm.
So just actually having that freedom to see how they all change over time and just how they interact with different cultures and everything like that. Just yeah, I'm feel really fortunate to have the access of information that I have, not only in my social circle, but the time that we live in now with the internet and just everybody feeling more open to share their beliefs and their practices.
Right. Yeah, it's such a wonderful thing. Forums and like YouTube and other things have really opened up not just the types of practice, but the idea of practice and what it means. And that's actually one of the things that this series is about, is just to show how varied the concept of magic is between practitioner to practitioner.
Right. And yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons why I'm glad that I'm actually doing this right now, because I personally do feel that there is a shift happening. I feel
Yeah.
that polytheism is definitely becoming much more accepted, magic is becoming much more accepted,
Hmm.
and you have new religious movements like Wicca and the likes that are coming up all the time. So I definitely feel like there is a desire for people to learn more, express themselves, and actually commune with their, whether it be the gods, their ancestors, or whatever may have you. They feel that deficiency that is not being present in a lot of the systems nowadays. So they are looking back and they're saying, hey, why do I feel this way? What
Yeah.
did they do way back when? What was so bad about it? Like, does this actually resonate with me?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny too because science seemed to be one of the major factors that pulled people away from like religion and magic. But the further the scientists push into this sort of lateral exploration, or this like or horizontal exploration rather, the more they're breaking into magical barriers that are just sort of reinforcing the old traditions.
Right. And how bold of them to assume through their new religious system that there are absolutely no gods among us. We are the ones who are finding out what is being woven into the universe and everything like that. So we are the ones who must do this now. It is our duty, yada, yada, yada.
Mhm. Yeah. So you mentioned that structure is one of your weak points. What do you feel is some of your strong points? What do you feel like you really excel at, or you really enjoy doing as a practitioner?
I kind of feel like this goes back into maybe my more right hand path tendencies. When I actually was Catholic, I was very devout. So thankfully I kind of feel like my devotion to a sense is kind of translated as well.
Sure.
Not so much me trying to encourage others to convert or anything like that. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm pretty sure I get some pushback if I were. But for me personally, like I will not eat in the morning if I don't do the LBRP or give my respect to Ashima Deva.
Hmm.
So things like that, like
Okay.
just consistency and just paying respect and just acknowledging where I see myself in the future. And like I said, I believe it is among their side.
Yeah, I that resonates with me entirely. I mean, I see myself as, I guess Crowley said, I don't agree with everything that Crowley said, but one of the interesting things was that every man and woman is a star. And I certainly see the potential for that when I look up into the night sky. And that's actually one of the things that drew me to Kepra's I don't want to say philosophy, but his perspective is he's really into the stellar tradition. And
Mm-hmm.
that was something that had always eluded me until I don't know, maybe a year ago. So I started looking into the stellar tradition and I started seeing like hey, he's on like eight different he's in like eight different places posting stuff, and I kept coming up with like three scarabs and Kepra Maset and all of these things. And then little did I know, slowly over time, they would form into this one person that was just like, oh wow, this is all the same. Well, the same person, but it was just like, okay. And then I emailed him and he emailed me back and we started a correspondence. And then I asked him for some like some literature to look into. And then like fast forward a year later and I'm doing this series and I'm like, he would make a really good um he
Really
would
good
he'd be
guest.
great. Yeah, a really good guess. Thank you for this, because it's such an interesting perspective. And I love thinking about how like there's been this torch that was lit way back when, and there are those of us who are like still carrying it for that day when that torch is ready to reignite that major beacon within our culture. And that's just so cool to me. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but I don't think it is.
No, man, let's keep wishing it. I mean, if that is wishful thinking, then let's keep wishing the same dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when three or more gather.
It's why not? I mean, even Jesus said, when three or more gather in my name, God is among us. So
Exactly. So, what are some recommended practices that you could suggest for other practitioners?
definitely get started with the LBRP. I feel
Okay,
like I don't think I'm ever going to stray away from that one. I may
that's a good
modify
one.
it over time, but
Mm.
I feel like that's a very good structural foundation to kind of start off with and then just kind of grow from there.
Mhm.
Um, like, hey, check out the inverse too. Like I said, there's a Cleopathic version as well if you want to try to incorporate some more shadow work and things like that within your own life,
Absolutely.
kind of confront your inner demons along with your higher self and whatnot. But nothing in particular, I would say, because like I say, I feel like structure is something that I'm still pursuing. So just
Yeah,
don't be discouraged. Keep pursuing, see what's out there, and you'll know when you're with the right people. You'll know when you're with your tribe or your gnome or whatever you want to call it.
absolutely. Yes. Yes. And I love that. I mean, like it's so well, I should rephrase that. It can be easy for some at certain times to be discouraged on this path. And I found that the sort of plateaus or the sort of wanderings are what create the individual experience of your path. Different people plateau at different places, and that drive and that passion and that inner flame that just keeps you going is honestly what I think is the difference between like someone who is actually experienced in this path and someone that has just sort of lived vicariously through others.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to, like you say, put yourself out there. I mean, absolutely listen to those who have come before you, but
Mhm.
don't allow that to be your only foundation. Allow them to be your co-workers, not your master. That's, as far as I'm concerned, what separates one of the major things that separates right versus left hand path. Like they
Yeah,
are, like the gods are like parental figures, sure, and I look up to them, I respect them, but I'm not going to be 100% subservient to them, especially if for whatever reason they started turning against me, I'd be like, no, no, no. I think I'm gonna take my business elsewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, there's adversity is one thing, but just complete, pushback is another.
Right. And thankfully I haven't really experienced too much of that outside of, like I said, that Lilith experience that I had. And again, that could have been just interpretation. That could have just been, hey, like you said, plateau. I haven't reached a certain point there I needed to be to actually receive what Lilith was trying to tell me.
Yeah, that might be something to meditate on. And maybe for more than just you, that might be something that a lot of us need to meditate on. Are there any other entities or deities or currents that you feel have helped propel you forward in your practice other than Ashima Deva? And I struggle to remember if there were any other you mentioned. I apologize, but yeah, were there any other that you felt help especially propel you forward in your practice?
The four main ones that I work with right now. So Set, I would definitely consider more of my patron deity. He's the big guy for me, and I'm definitely a believer of the concept of two brothers. So the balance between the two. So I recognize Horus the Elder as the brother of Set.
Is that Heru
Um,
Raha or
um,
Heru? Is it Heru or? I can't remember what the name is. I believe it was Heru or was another name of Horus the Elder. Sorry for
I would
interrupting.
have to look that up myself. I have the book in front of me, but yeah, I should have had it open to that page. Whoops. Like I said, Set's my main guy. So
That's okay. That's okay. So yeah,
admittedly, I should give Horus a little bit more respect than I do, but like I say, I give him respect for the day and everything like that. But yeah, ultimately, I feel like I align myself more with the left hand current, so maybe I neglect him a little bit more than I should.
sure. Um,
Um,
yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you mentioned there was a fourth one, and I believe you've only mentioned three, so I thought there was one more coming.
Yeah, so the other one is Eshu Elegua Papalegba. So he actually comes from more Ifa based traditions. And just full disclaimer, I have not been initiated yet. So any information I would say about him, please take that with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
But funnily enough, I actually found him while I was doing more research on Set and
Hmm.
the conflation that a lot of people who want to vilify more African traditions and things like that, like voodoo and all that, and just say like, "Oh, that's the devil's work." They actually conflate Eshu with Satan just because he is a trickster entity, and I'm like, "Nah, he's the one that he opens up the way before you." Not to say that he can't throw adversity your way; that's part of his nature, but to say that he is a malicious entity like how they portray Satan or anything like that is 100% false. So just because he may have that kind of like trickster-ish nature to him, and I believe I said it earlier, he's actually considered Lord of the left and the right hand path. So
Yeah.
even though he is an Orisha in that tradition, he is like more or less a god in that tradition. He is also Lord of like the demons, the Okje, I believe is how you pronounce them. Yeah, he is actually Lord of them. So like the eight afflictions, I believe is how it's translated into English. He's actually the one who's in charge of them as well.
Hmm.
So he's a very balanced energy. He's kind of like a psychopomp as well, along with like Set and all those entities. So I
Okay.
can see why people would conflate him with like, or not conflate him with Satan because he's. Uh, I can see why they got intertwined with each other. I suppose was the right word I was trying to say. Just because
Yeah, maybe equate was.
yeah, like improperly equate, but because they have more of these what people would call negative qualities, then yeah, it makes it easier to lump them in, even though he has a lot more beneficial qualities. Like, hey, say some respect to him, like be respectful to him. He's so far I haven't had any problems working with Eshu. I love the guy. I mean, I love all the guys that I work with.
I always think it's hilarious that there's these entities, like Satan is one of them, um, where it's like you get some like adversarial energy like toward you, not you, but one might get some adversarial energy, and then they're like, oh, this is evil because all of this bad stuff is happening in my life, and it's like, but that's how you get stronger. Or
Mm-hmm.
they'll take someone like Loki and vilify him, and it's like you realize that's an essential part of the formula for existence and development, right? Or they'll vilify. It's to me. I mentioned this in another interview. Sorry to anybody who's tired of me repeating things, but there to me there's an interesting like gradients between Lucifer, Satan, and the devil, because like the adversarial nature of what I consider Satan to be, it can be very enlightening, but and like Lucifer, but it can also be so adversarial that people get into a place of their life that they don't want to be, and they're like, oh, this is diabolic and this is of the devil. So it's always interesting to me how people just like instantly equate any sense of chaos or opening of the door with evil. And I don't know, it's just it's funny to me. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
No, I'm actually glad that you feel similar along that, just because, yeah, it's annoying now that I'm not affiliated with Christianity or anything like that outside
Mhm.
of, well, I shouldn't say I'm totally out of Christianity, just because I do have a lot of value in the Gnostic system, but
Okay.
of course you can't call that Christianity. That goes against our orthodoxy. You can't
Sure.
have that Jesus. That's a different Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. And where does Yaldabaoth fit in with that whole thing? You can't just call him Satan. You can't just call him, the devil. And that complicates things. And if you can't write it down in a sentence, a lot of the modern traditions don't want any part of it.
But in a way, he actually kind of does, because they identify him in the Gnostic traditions as the Lord of the world. And in all those parables where Jesus is wandering the desert, how do they depict
Yeah.
Satan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just fall down and worship me.
Interesting. Yeah. So speaking of adversity and difficulty, what are some of the difficulties that you've experienced being a practitioner?
I would say probably wrestling with myself and how I feel with it. Like I said before, I kind of wrestled as to whether or not I truly was a believer. And
Right.
once I kind of wrestled with that bout of atheism, I just came to the conclusion of, I do believe that there is definitely much more than just this physical self. And even when I was doing my best to be a devout Christian, I just felt this discontentment. And I even remember saying when I was younger, Satan is a hero, because if this version of Christianity is true, then having the courage to stand up to this all knowing, oppressive God that claims to give you freedom, but if he knows everything and still allows you to be born knowing how you are, like, I've always wrestled with that. And I know that a lot of theologians will try to justify their belief for that. And if that makes sense to you, fine. It personally just no longer makes sense to me. I will say in my own heart of hearts that Satan, if you are going to say that the Abrahamic system is true, then I will say that even though Satan is a loser to you guys, I will say that even though he had no way of winning, the fact that he had the courage to stand up is what makes him a champion. Like that whole,
I like that.
yeah, you need to stand up. Like I remember this, saying this as a kid with tears streaming down my face, because I just felt overwhelmed for whatever reason. Just like I felt like I had to do it right. I had to be this kind of Christian, because the path is so narrow and how wide is the path of destruction.
Right.
So now I have to kind of deprogram that for myself a little bit too. So me doing this light working that I'm doing right now is, I don't want to say that's necessarily daunting, but I do feel a
Some
sense of
difficulty.
freedom.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Oh, I see what
like
you're saying. I see what you're saying. Okay.
because I'm able to go in there now without the blinders on that they have, and if anything, I can actually try to see the rituals for what they are. Like, where did they originally come from? How are they manifest? How is Yaldabaoth basically borrowing power from these other systems? Because I definitely don't feel like he was born on his own. He's definitely kind of like what we're doing. He's standing on the shoulders of giants. He stands upon the shoulders of greater gods.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely, I maybe that was the one. It's not that I have a problem with Gnosticism. It's just, I guess I take every perspective as like a piece of the pie, and the one thing that I could never see, even though he tricked Sophia, as the legend goes, I just never saw him as like the enemy, or like I just don't equate him with the devil, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because he's one half fire and one half darkness. And like that's always how I saw myself. Maybe it was because I was raised Catholic, but I always felt so inadequate and just yeah, I guess inadequate is sort of the perfect word. And to me, that force, that current represented like, I guess, pursuing through adversity. I really don't know how to say it any
You
differently
mean
than that.
Yaldabaoth, or you mean God, or you mean Satan? I just
Yaldabaoth,
want to
yeah,
clarify.
yeah,
Okay,
the lion-headed serpent, and yeah,
gotcha.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, that's I like discussing Gnosticism because there's so many different perspectives. Because there's like the Nag Hammadi Gnosticism, and then there's like the Samael Aun Weor Gnosticism. I don't know if you know who that is or not, but he was like an interpretist of the Gnostic Bible, the Pistis Sophia, and
Hmm.
stuff. And so anytime I'm talking to a Gnostic, I'm like, okay, which kind of Gnostic are you? Like, are you like Gospel of Philip Nag Hammadi Gnostic, or are you like the more modern interpretation? Yeah, version.
Hey, if you want to throw another cog into that loop, are you Aquarian? Do you ascribe to the Aquarian gospel? Are you that kind of Gnostic? Do you
Right.
ascribe to a more Hinduized Jesus?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That's, yeah, that might be for another time, perhaps.
Let's not go into that giant can of worms.
It's funny though that you did that. I forgot about that whole variant. So how do you view the importance of materials in your practice? I know you mentioned like candles and incense and stuff. How often do you involve materials in your practice?
For some of my rituals, I like to give offerings. So a
Okay.
perfect example is I celebrate the birth of Set.
Mhm.
Um, I believe it goes along with the inundation of the Nile. So
Okay.
June 16th, I believe, or not June, July 16th, pardon me. Um, I'll double check the date in a second. But yeah, basically, I celebrate his birthday every 3 weeks on repeat. So, like, something that I'll personally do is like, I will offer them flowers, I will pour libations, I will burn the incense, I'll do certain rituals and words of power and things like that.
Okay.
And kind of things like that. So, even though it's not necessarily the material, I believe it's the intention of you wanting to give to them. So,
Sure.
it's not so much the material aspect, it's more how you give to them. Like, what is it you really want to give?
Yeah.
Like, when
The,
you're like in some traditions, like you'll actually spit on your idol or things like that. Like,
uh-huh.
the intention isn't to spit on them. The intention, blah. The intention, pardon me, is to essentially share your breath or your essence with them.
Right.
So it's not so much the material; it's so much the intention behind them. Like, gold has no real value or anything like that, I'm sure, to the spirits. It's what does it correspond to, I'm sure.
Interesting. So you mentioned, and we can totally move past this if this is too personal, but I always love the concept of words of power. So are there any words of power that you could share that are associated with like the Setian current, or the Sethian currents, or any of the entities that you work with, or is it just sort of like vibrating their specific names or things like that?
More so vibrating their names and just repeating certain prayers and things like that.
Cool.
But if you are interested in any specific ones, one that doesn't get brought up enough, I think, since we were talking about like or the conflation between shadow and light work, or my kind of struggle with that. uh GB Marion, he actually has a whole thing on his thing into the Desert Set where he actually goes into a Baramenthos, and
Okay.
basically it's just a name that both Jesus and Set end up sharing in the Greek magical papyri, I believe is what it is. Oh, speaking of that, it is July 16th for his birthday. So
Okay.
that's the one that I use. So every 3 weeks I celebrate the anniversary of his birth. And yeah, Set, Satesh, by whatever name you want to call him, but a
Mhm.
better though, I feel is definitely one of the more relevant ones trying to balance the light and the dark.
So when you said a paramento, I was reminded of the Greek character. I believe it's Cairo, or no, it's not. It's Rho. Sorry, I was thinking Chi Rho, the PX or the R uh,
Hmm.
Chi, and I thought like Aramanios when you said. I'm sorry. What was the name that you said?
I
A
said Aberamenthos. I'm
oh,
unfamiliar
okay.
with that entity that you said though. Who are they?
Well, it's a like an aspect of Ahriman and the
Okay.
like the Sumerian tradition. So I thought the B was a P. So I was like, okay, that's a whole nother wormhole for me to, or a whole nother rabbit hole for me to for me to travel down later. And I'm not
I mean,
familiar with GB Marion. Well, okay, the name sounds familiar, but I don't off the top of my head recollect who they are.
he's another Setian, so
Okay.
he does have a YouTube channel as well and a
Okay.
website. So
Okay.
I feel like he and Kefera or Wandering in Darkness are definitely some of my more modern influences. And again, with Kefera, getting to have him, on my phone, that definitely helps. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's been awesome corresponding with them as well. So what are some things that you could suggest to avoid as a practitioner?
don't be too full of yourself.
Hmm.
Like, just because you have the power to do something doesn't inherently mean that you should. I brought up earlier that I did actually curse someone, and whether or not people want to choose to believe that I have that kind of ability, like I said, I'm not even 100% sure whether or not it was just me giving that little extra oomph for what was already going to happen. But don't try to bite off more than what you can chew, and be honest with not only the people you talk to, but be honest with yourself. Like,
Right.
my experience with Lilith wasn't exactly what I was hoping it was going to be, but I just have to tell myself and others, like, hey, I may not be able to actually descend down the tree of Qliphoth at this time right now, just because I need to reconcile whatever my differences are with Lilith. So even though I would identify more with that current, at
Right.
least in that method, I'm kind of stuck. So don't be afraid
Well,
to admit those kind of things, I suppose.
that's great advice. I so many people that I talk to about the Clipoth and the caverns, so-called caverns and tunnels, they I just experienced so much delusion, it seems like, and so much like ego and bravado and stuff about all this. And it's like it's a disillusionary process. Like if you come to in my mind, if you come out of the cliff off with a huge sense of yourself, I'm just not sure, like it breaks you down, which you might reflect on the essence that's left and realize how grand that is, but that to me doesn't attribute to the ego and to most of the ways that people have talked about it so far. That's one reason I started and opened this channel and named it what I named it, is because I want to explore the nature of the unconscious and how that relates to the citra akra, or the adverse side. So I think the fact that you are willing to be honest with yourself about that is going to cause you to have a better experience and potentially achieve more progress than a lot of your peers.
Like, I don't want to say this to kind of give myself a big head or anything like that, but I personally feel kind of culmination of I am trying to be as mindful of myself and my own abilities as I can,
Mhm.
but at the same time, being pushed to go on your channel and just some other events that have been happening in my life, I'm just like, I see things happening. So I feel like it's definitely time to challenge yourself. It's definitely time to
Sure.
advance and always try to build upon yourself. But at the same time, don't like that whole fake it before you make it thing that works to an extent, but
To an
don't,
extent.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, don't lie. I mean, like you said, don't be haughty about it or anything like that. Like, and just this seems kind of contradictory since I say I'm more left hand path, but like actually having that small community that actually just gets you when
Yeah.
you just deal with so much of your own BS, I just feel like that is so beneficial,
Yeah,
magician or no.
absolutely. There can be so much delusion and unintentional self-deceit along this path that it really does help to have a very small, and I personally I say very small community that can sort of say, hey, like you're getting a big head, or no, 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 I experienced that too, or hey, I really like what you're doing. It's different. You should do more of that. Can be really, really beneficial to a so-called left-hand practitioner.
Right. Don't get stuck in your own echo chamber. I mean, I understand the
Yeah.
trap of getting stuck in other people's, but don't get caught up in your own.
Sure. And while we're on the subject of being, pushed to the edge of your comfort zone, I hope I didn't make you feel too pushed to come on um
Oh no,
and
my
speak.
fragile ego is shattered. No, I've really enjoyed myself. You're great to talk to. You've been
Appreciate that.
really good with all the technical difficulties, so I appreciate your patience on that front.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying myself right now.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I um I hope that most of my guests, if not all of my guests, feel comfortable. A lot of them mentioned that they're really nervous when they come on, and then like the next thing they know, they're like, "Oh, it's been 2 hours. Well, I guess I'm gonna go get some food now. I'm starving." So, how is magic typically viewed, or how is the occult typically viewed in your area?
I live in a pretty big area, so
Okay.
I don't feel like it's inherently too stigmatized. If anything, people would probably just raise your eyebrow and say, like, oh, you're into that stuff, you're weird, whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
So hopefully it's mostly like that, but not to say that you don't have your zealots here like you would other places, just like proselytizing saying, hey, are you right with Jesus? Are you right with Jesus? I'm like, um, on which current?
That's yes, exactly. The number one comment that I get from people who aren't okay with this stuff on my channel is y'all need Jesus. And my response is always like, how do you know we don't have Jesus? Like maybe they're different to everybody, It's I always get this vision of like getting to heaven or getting to the underworld and there being multiple gates. Like I've had that vision so many times.
Exactly. I mean, there are so many different traditions and interpretations, and who's to say whether or not they're just different cultures viewing the same thing through different lenses, or if it's
Yeah.
going to be American God style, where it's literally a free for all and it's all next to each other.
Yeah, can you imagine if there really are only 700 people that make it into heaven? It's like, oh man, like it's gonna be like a Hunger Games.
Oh man, that well, they can all have fun up there. I'm gonna have to
Exactly. Yeah.
find out how to enjoy hell if that's gonna be the case, which I'm already comfortable with if I'm wrong. So you know what? Whatever.
That's kind of where I am too. It's like what I've experienced and what I've done, like I accept my fate, whatever it is, because I feel content and I feel fulfilled so far in what I've been doing. So, so be it, I guess, is what I would say.
Not only that, if Jesus truly loves you so much and he is so desperate to get you into his kingdom, why is he so aloof when his message is so instrumental for our eternal survival?
Huh. That's a
So
great
yeah.
question. That's a great question.
So yeah, I feel like if for whatever reason, like you said, we're totally wrong and the gods that we've been speaking to these whole times are in fact demons, well, hey, thank you for feeling more comfortable actually getting to speak to us as opposed to the high and mighty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like you say, like why was his message so aloof? Like some like that question might be more important than the answer or the answer. I mean, the fact that it isn't as, succinct and precise as it could be, yet it's meant to be taken literally in a lot of contexts. That like there are a lot of fundamentalists who say this is the word of God, and it's like, well, then why has it been changed by several kings and popes and reinterpreted? And to me, my perspective of the Christian Bible is like it started as like anagrams of acronyms. Like if you look at the Hebrew language, like and moving letters around and stuff and like using gematria and all of these things, it's to me the Bible is like I said, it's an anagram of acronyms that was then translated like into Greek and then into Latin, and then like King James like had their way with it, taking out the word tyranny because he didn't want people using that word in society and equating it to them. I mean, it's just like I don't know, man. If it's the word of God, like why was it changed, and why are you still following the word of man? Is sort of where I stand. Not that this is about what my beliefs, but I guess that's where I stand on it. If anybody wanted to know.
Well, I mean, this is your channel, so you kind of hope they would want to. So if not, then you know exactly where to go.
Exactly. So
But that, oh,
go
sorry, what were
ahead.
you gonna
Go
say?
go ahead. Go ahead, please.
So just kind of piggybacking off of that. So I don't necessarily have a problem with Christ so long as it is more along these Gnostic currents and things like that. I feel like that's kind of more what I'm starting to realize. But I definitely do not affiliate nor agree with the whole there is the only one, everyone else is wrong, you are all damned if you choose to deviate from my interpretation and everything like that.
Right.
But some things that Christ said, like even in the Bible itself, like I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically, do not put a lamp under a basket, instead put it upon a high mountain, things like that. Like those to
Mm,
me are very what a lot of people I suppose would call Luciferian in context. Like be that light, actually bring that out into the world. Like let your
yeah.
light shine, man. Don't hide that stuff.
Yeah.
And like that to me is personally why I think Gnosticism makes more sense, because if you go back to the whole Jesus was in the desert and everything like that, that version of Satan was the one who was saying, like, hey, you need to be subservient to me, you must bow, and
Right.
all these other things. And that negation of him is what essentially allowed the heavens to open up for Christ. So I
Interesting.
personally think that makes more sense in my mind.
Yeah, and if you think about it from that perspective, was the devil really being evil? Like, or was that sort of the will of God, because God wanted the heavens to open for Christ in one perspective, and that wouldn't have happened without that temptation. And that's one reason why I equate Satan with Lucifer, like in a gradient a little bit, because that adversity is what paves the road. Like I often say that growth is at the edge. Well, a lot of people say this, but I agree with it, that growth is at the edge of your comfort zone.
I'm probably going to bastardize the phrasing, but a Socrates phrase is a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor to a man without struggle.
Man, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love Socrates. Gotta love Socrates.
Not sure if it was Socrates or one of the
Oh,
other Stoic guys, but
mhm.
yeah, just one of those Stoic parables, I suppose.
Okay. So how important is solitude in your practice?
It's pretty important. However, my long term goal and dream would actually be my lifestyle to be more accepting and common. So,
Right.
again, I actually hope that we will see the day where polytheism does make a big comeback. But probably contradictory to what other people would advise me to do. I'm actually moderately open when it comes to my practices. Like I feel like it actually does tie heavily into my morals and my ethics and things like that. So, not that I'll inherently throw any of my gods in their face or anything like that, but if for whatever reason they want to know, I'll tell them.
Right.
Or if I think that they're going to be, confrontational or unaccepting, then yeah, I know to back off then. But I don't know. For the most part, I don't want to say I'm naive, but I'm hopeful that there are more people that are hungry for this information. So I kind of try to let myself be open and allow it to kind of play from there.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yeah, it's almost my experience has been, as I've gotten into this more adversarial context over the last few years, it almost seems more, I don't know, not detrimental, may perhaps detrimental to my path to deny my beliefs. Like you said, like I don't go around saying like this is what I believe, this is what I believe, and you should believe it too. But it's like when somebody asks me, like I get this like I don't know, like it's like a sharp point inside me that's like, are you going to deny who you are and who you're trying to become? And I can't allow myself to do that, because I say every time, but it's only ever happened once, and I thought that it was to the betterment of the person I was speaking to. I just felt like I slipped. Like I felt like Sisyphus, like trying to carry the boulder, and then I just let the boulder go. And like
Oh
ever since
no.
then, I was just like, well, maybe I should be more, not necessarily like steadfast in my beliefs, but like it's a very large part of who I am. And to deny that is sort of almost like a step off of my path, perhaps. It's hard to explain.
No, I feel you. I like you're saying. I mean, maybe that poking, if I'm taking it out of context, then I apologize, but maybe that poking is just like that inner flame inside you just kindling, just like, hey, I have something to share with you. I
Yeah.
I want to let the light out.
Yes, that's exactly how it feels. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I say it's a pinprick, but it could also be considered like a burn almost, like the fire is growing to my edges, trying to expand, and it's uncomfortable a little bit. But yeah, I mean, if I'm gonna stray from the uncomfortable, I mean, I don't think this is really any place for me.
Right. And I mean, sadly, we're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. That's going to be true for everybody. So, eventually maybe I'll take my own advice when it comes to this, but learn to love yourself before you try to accept the love of others.
Yeah, no kidding. Otherwise, there won't be a place to put it.
No kidding. Yeah.
So you mentioned having worked in the lower tree. What, if you don't mind sharing with us, what did that working look like for you? Was it like just a visualization and path working? Was it a ceremony? Was it a little bit of both or something else?
Kind of impromptu ceremony.
Okay.
So, again, I use parts of the Tree of
Tree of Cliff
Qliphotep
Off
for
by
some
Anon Mason.
inspiration,
Okay.
but like I take the concept personally of like three or incorporating a trinity. So I believe that when I did it, I used Ashima Deva and Set, and I kind of use them as like a makeshift father, mother, son type thing,
Okay.
just to kind of have their essences to kind of strengthen it a bit. Um, and I believe it was actually during that ritual where I actually got the message I have to accept forgiveness or I have to allow forgiveness in. And then maybe it was a few days after where I actually saw either Lilith or the servant of Lilith. So
Very interesting.
yeah, not necessarily 100% to the formula that they had, just because there were certain things that they said, like use your own blood. And I'm like, nope, I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not like certain traditions. I'm just like, I have no problem with baneful work or cliffothic work or whatever
Mhm.
terminology you want to use. But I guess one thing that I personally do not want to do as of yet is offer my blood. Like, funnily
Yeah.
enough, I'll
Yeah.
actually offer my hair and things like that. I don't have problems offering that, but I'm just cautious about offering blood.
Blood
So,
seems relatively permanent to me when it comes to practice. And as far as like giving it to just some random like person's concept of a deity, that like to each their own. But whenever I used that same book, the Asenoth Mason Tree of Cliffoth, like as a
mhm.
template for my own workings, like I definitely supplemented very heavily. The same, like my Cliffothic workings are like an amalgam of everything that I came across. And then I just sort of retranslated it for myself. And I found that to be much more effective than the first two times I tried doing it using other people's methods. Because, like I said, this so much of this is subjective and up for an interpretation and personal translation, I think.
Well, not only that, I feel like you're also something that I kind of think that I've been experiencing more so is like will attract like. So,
Yeah.
like the friends
Yeah.
that yeah, like me doing this now, the friends that I have in my life right now. So, I feel like the energy and the intention that you put in it is much more beneficial than per se the structure or whatever items you may be using to help benefit your ritual or things like that. So, how you were saying it's subjective, I personally would view that as how much of yourself are you actively putting into this.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. Well said. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry. I just very, very, very heavily agreed with you.
Oh no, you're fine. I was pretty much wrapping it up. Like they will be able to more or less follow that current, I think, is more or less how you can probably think of it. So the more energy you're able to give out, they're able to connect with that more easily.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. And for me, like I, I'll say this is sort of a blanket statement just because I don't want to try to sit here and decide dissect my whole practice. But for me, like using blood and practice is very, very heavily tied to ancestral work. Um, like I will typically only reserve that for like I said, ancestral work or like very personal things. And when I do, it's like a pinprick of a lancet. It's not like I'm slashing my hand open with my ritual dagger and just like, you know, squeezing out a pint of blood or something. It's like boop, little pin prick on a piece of paper. And to me, it's more about the intention. It's more about the symbolism of the gesture than the actual gesture itself.
Right. I mean, let's save all that flowery stuff for Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I
No
mean,
kidding.
of course, it looks cool on a screen to watch some guy, mutilate himself and everything like that. But I feel like that would just kind of further feed into the fear and stigma that a lot of people have with magic. Like, oh no, they say use blood or use semen or use whatever terminology they had to kind of hide whatever root or herb they were actually using because of actual persecution way back when.
Huh.
So I don't know, like to each
Interesting.
their own, but I definitely believe like Steven Skinner, I believe is his name.
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Stephen
how
Skinner probably.
yeah, so Steven Skinner, he says it's about correspondences and things like that. So, like you said, is the intention, it is what does this blood represent? So
Yep.
you say that you use blood for ancestral work and things like that. Like
Mhm.
I would view that as this is the continuing legacy of your ancestors.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah. And also to me, and this actually came from, I guess you could call them a mentor of mine. Like blood is the physical manifestation of fire and water. Like it's the life force and the fire like in a wet form, which is like a perfect amalgam of fire and water. So that's pretty magical too.
that's actually a perfect synthesis. So, okay, actually, I can't say this. I do not associate east with air or wind when I do LBRP. I associate that with fire. So for me, it goes fire to the east, air to the south,
Yeah.
water to the west, and then earth to the north. Like that whole air to the east thing, I would personally view that more along the lines of the demiurgic concept, like how they actually have in some of those texts, like how the wind was churning the water, and that is what essentially formed Yaldabaoth, or like there's a couple different versions of it, but I just remember reading that in one of those texts. I'm like, that makes so much sense why I
Don't
because
resonate with it.
well, also there's another book that I read. It was called Stolen Legacy, and it actually had a brief little blip about how the Comedics actually viewed the sorry, I can't speak. The
That's okay.
four elements and like their properties. So they actually had it where they were opposite. So the opposite of fire is water. The opposite of air is earth.
Hmm.
Air is the ceiling of fire. Earth is the ceiling to water and all that jazz.
Yeah.
So that's how I personally do my LBRP as well. So another thing to add in there.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I always also like on top of that sort of wondered how much those attributions were tied to the geology. The you know the wind coming from the east wherever those rituals were being performed and the sun or the sun rising in the east and the sun being associated with fire. But it sounds like unless I'm mistaken like that is you're using the Egyptian attributions or the Kemetic attributions to the correspondence to the elements. Is that correct?
Yeah, I feel like that's where I most closely want to align my structure along the more Egyptian, African currents and things like that. I am not actively right now, but I am still interested in some ancestral work and things like that. So that will take me out of African belief systems and introduce me to more Celtic belief systems and things like that.
Interesting.
So yeah, I'm definitely open to it. I don't feel like just because I'm gravitated towards something doesn't mean I have to necessarily limit myself to it. But overall, I would say Egyptian belief system is a stronger foundation for my overall practice.
Okay, I like that. So, are there any films or literature or music that you would recommend that really convey the spirit of magic or the occult?
Not sure if somebody else already said it before, but a dark song is
Love it.
actually, yeah, just the way they actually show the Abramelin ritual.
Uh-huh.
I had no knowledge of it before, and I was just like,
Oh, okay.
is this, I was like, is this the Lima? Is this an older current? Like, where is this coming from? And then, over time, I kind of like, oh, it's its own kind of thing where it's a mismatch of Christianity and some other traditions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, if people want to actually see what a more intense ceremonial ritual would actually look like, that would definitely be a good one. Even though it has its own flashiness and things like that, at
Sure,
times I
sure.
feel like it's much more grounded than a lot of the other movies and things like that. Um, that's definitely one of them. I can't really.
Yeah, just off the top of your head. I'm not trying to like rack your
Yeah,
brain or anything.
a dark song is probably. I haven't watched it in a while, but I still feel like that one just stuck out in terms of the authenticity of it. Like they weren't trying to just scare you or anything like that. Like they were legit showing the conflict of this woman and what actually brought her to needing this kind of resolution within herself. So that I feel is a very good story.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was certainly one of my favorite occult films that I've seen. And I only watched it because Dr. Justin Sledge on the YouTube channel Esoterica had brought it up and he highly recommended it. So I think within that week I watched it with my partner and her and I both were just like at the end of it, like I'm getting chills right now thinking about it. I've been getting a lot of chills in these interviews lately. Um, it was just
Speaking of
like, wow.
forgiveness,
Yeah, yeah. I just it really made an impression, I guess I'll say. So that's a great recommendation. And last question already. Um, what what do you see as the future of your practice, or perhaps what are your immediate plans for the future as far as your practice goes?
well, I said while I was meditating, I did see Lilith. So I don't
That's right.
meditate as much as I know I need to, but when I do, I feel is when I'm able to better see things or have visions or whatever you may want to call them. So the reason why I personally am actually going to different Christian denominations, things like that, is because I am trying to reconcile a vision that I had. I try to say it the best that I can, but without giving away too much of it. Essentially, I saw in my mind Baphomet and the whole arms pointed up and down and opposite, but then Baphomet, oddly enough, turned to Christ.
That's a
And
very common thing, actually.
really,
It is, yeah. So there's actually a tradition where Christ and Baphomet are placed on the same altar facing each other, and that is to show a mystery. I'll say it's a mystery.
so you'll probably get a kick out of this. Then you'll probably be able to give me your own interpretation of it. Then, so yeah, Baphomet became Christ, and as again, I said Baphomet had their arms pointed up and down
Mhm.
instead of just the arms automatically going up to where Christ was crucified. It
Uh-huh.
kind of became a kaleidoscope. So the two arms became four, and then it became
Wow.
essentially a wheel. And within that wheel, I saw the zodiac, or what I interpret to be the zodiac, because I saw 12 slots within it. And I'm just like, you've got to be bleeping kidding me, like for lack of better words. I'm trying so hard not to curse on your channel, but I'm just
I
like,
don't give
what
a
in the
shit,
actual
but
F?
yeah, I mean, yeah, I
Okay,
that,
fine. So I'll just say, like, what the hell did I just see then? Like, what in the holy hell was this crap? Like,
yeah,
so I personally kind of interpreted that as, even though I am more affiliated and aligned with more darker currents, there is something to the lighter currents. Like my sister-in-law, she'll say, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater." So
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Then sorry to interrupt. There's also the whole like the sign of benediction that Christ and Baphomet both made, and I don't know if that's because Eliphas Levi or if it's something else, but there's definitely a connection between. So to me, Christ represents like the perfect union of above and below, and that's why he ascended on a crucifix, which is a marriage of, the horizontal and the vertical, or material and spiritual. And
Right.
Baphomet is close to a perfect representation of, a marriage of opposites in many ways. So there's definitely a connection there. And it's also interesting to note that in the Knights Templar tradition, allegedly, they accepted Baphomet, whether this is true or not, they accepted Baphomet as their like icon, and they had to spit and walk on a crucifix. So it's almost like, I don't know, like out with the old and with the new, but they didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So they kept that Promethean uh, concept of the Christos and of the anointed one, so to speak.
It's hard to say. I mean, some people try to say that Baphomet was just a misinterpretation of Muhammad, and the whole reason why they were really mad at them is just because, they were secretly practicing Islam, or they just wanted to call it demonology or whatever, just because they were so xenophobic of other belief systems.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like your interpretation more, though, just the whole, obviously, I do, well, not obviously, I do ascribe to the interpretation of Baphomet where they are that union of opposites, they are that balanced being. And it's just interesting to see how much carryover all these gods can have with each other. Like a
Like Christ and
Baramento, I mean,
Osiris.
yeah, I'll definitely take Christ and Set over Christ and Osiris personally. I'll take a Baramenthos versus the Horus, the younger knockoff, but that's just me personally.
Yeah, it occurs to me now, or reoccurs, I suppose, that Haru Raha is a thelemic concept, and Heru Or, I believe, is the Horus the Elder. And I had
I think that
misspoke earlier, so I just wanted to clarify that.
I think that like there's so many different names for Horus. Like in Michael Aquino's work, I personally consider that. So here's a hot take where all the thelemic people can get pissed off at me. I personally feel that Awaz and Set are, if not the same entity, they are in alignment with each other. And the channeling that Michael Aquino got, I personally have that in my own journal, and I actually say that's the fourth day. That was the fourth channeling. And I know a lot of people say that. I forget who they say the other writer was who received it, and I'm just like, well, for me personally, this makes a little bit more sense just because, it focuses more on Set. And I
Yeah.
just find it to see the similarities within each other. And even on the Stellar Revealing, the main focal point is actually the Waz scepter, and the Waz is Set. Set is the strength of the gods in that context.
Yes. Yes. Very, yeah. I love that. I love that you pointed that out. Um, yeah. What was there anything else that you wanted to mention and bring up as far as our discussion goes? Anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Um,
Did I miss
no,
anything?
not really. Not really. Just for anybody who does want to try to explore this part of themselves, this is something that I personally struggle with. Do not wait for permission.
Hmm.
Like, do not wait for someone else to tell you to live your own life, because you're going to be waiting a hell of a long time if you're
We're gonna
waiting
be
for.
waiting a lifetime.
Yeah, and then you're basically just going to be food for the worms. And what did you really accomplish at that time? Like, this is definitely something that I acknowledge within myself. I need to do a lot more, but even if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, like, start taking those steps. Like, if you have a long-term goal, if you have any form of a goal, if you want to see a better version of yourself, do it. Do not feel like you are confounded by religion, politics, whatever the hell people will try to say about you. Like, you got to do it.
Yeah.
You need to be you, because no one else is doing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you also have an Instagram, correct?
Yes, sir. Same name as you see on screen. I am a Mon92 Anon. You can catch me there. Try to have some left hand pass settings, style works, and all that stuff. Expect some more in the future.
Yeah, and this has been some of your work that's been projected up on the screen throughout the discussion as well, correct?
Yeah, so three of them are already up on my Instagram. The second one in that slide was kind of based off of the book of Daniel. That was actually one of my earlier works when I
Ah,
was younger.
okay.
Yeah, so yeah, Daniel chapter 4, I forget which verse it was, but then the fourth beast appeared to me bearing 10 horns and iron claws and teeth, and then the middle horn protruded from his
Ah.
head and spoke to all the nations. So when I see things like that, I'm like, I can see the Sephiroth and I can see Dot appearing out of his head,
Yeah,
speaking to all the
exactly.
nations, allowing the magic out.
Yep, man. Yeah, and the whole book, like the whole book of Revelation to me is like a path working, or obviously it's a revelation, but when I use it as a path working, I have some pretty far out experiences.
It's definitely a powerful current. I can imagine whatever John was on when he saw that stuff, he definitely felt moved. And
Yeah.
not trying to, how do I say this? Like when I brought the Aquarian gospel earlier,
Uh,
there actually is a Gnostic church within my area that actually uses that as their template. And there's not a lot of people there. They don't want a lot of people there. That's actually one of my favorite churches to go to, though.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up is because even though I feel like I may have inadvertently closed myself off temporarily to Lilith, I feel like that doesn't inherently close me off from the goddess, because they actually had their own inauguration of Mary into heaven, or coronation into heaven. So we actually celebrated that recently.
Yeah.
And there was a woman there, and I can only imagine what's going on in her personal life, but kind of what little I was able to get from her. She's been trying to find the balance between the mundane and the esoteric. And
Uh,
yeah, she definitely needed to be there. She needed that experience because, yeah, it was very emotional for her. So I hope that she was able to connect with the feminine in her own way. And I hope that I was able to be supporting through my own current in that own way. So yeah, just put yourself out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't be afraid to make yourself vulnerable. I was just saying this in another video, like it, being vulnerable can make you more strong, as long as you do it at the right time for the right reason. There's nothing wrong with being open, and that's one thing that I've tried to do with this channel is to be as genuine and authentic and open about myself as I can, so that others feel inspired to do the same. Obviously in a careful and controlled manner, but we could benefit from more individuated opinions and perspectives out there, I think.
Yeah. And we need that now more than
Yes,
ever.
I
Like
agree.
I used the term echo chamber earlier. I mean, if we so individuation is incredibly important. I am not going to besmirch that by any stretch of the imagination. But if you allow that to be taken too far, then you're going to be totally segregated for larger powers to be able to dominate you.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, there's definitely, it's a double edged sword. I mean, definitely be yourself. Definitely do not be afraid within reason to say who you are and what you believe. I mean, so long as you're not trying to hurt anyone else, it should not be a problem with anyone else. But yeah, just if you take individuation too far or anything like that, like I said, it will just allow the interest groups that do not care about you to have that power over you, to continue to lord over you.
yeah.
So yeah,
Balance
be
is key, right?
vulnerable. Yeah, be
Yep.
knowledgeable, be yourself, but at the same time, try to allow that openness. Like you said, that vulnerability is a strength in itself.
Mhm. I agree. Yeah, my grandpa used to always say moderation in all things, including moderation.
Yeah, definitely do that.
Awesome. Well, Anon, I very much appreciate you coming on and speaking with us. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. And yeah, I have a feeling that we're going to be in correspondence outside of this discussion.
I certainly hope so. Thank you very much for having me on, Hermit.
Awesome. No problem. No problem. And yeah, have a good rest of the week. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
All
Take
right,
care.
take care.